Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a US political live stream and it's going to be a big one, right? There's a lot of stuff to go through today. I need to go over a little bit of what I talked about in a previous video on this topic, and this topic is divisive. I say to the mods who are very awesomely helping out in the live chat, please do not ban anyone who is engaging in good faith dialogue. There's the operative phrase. I welcome dissenting opinions as long as it's done with respect. But obviously this might attract a few people that are, well, people are going to disagree, right? Fascism is a term that is bandied around an awful lot, and some are claiming at the moment, particularly on the right, that racism and racist and fascist and Nazi are terms that are too frequently used to the point that they've lost their meaning. I'm using this in quite a technical sense, where I've established this in a previous video that was a long video on the US's descent into fascism. I'm now going to talk about this again using a lot of very similar talking points, but similar pieces of stimuli. And I think things are going pretty badly south in the US at the moment, and it is worrying. I also think there's elements of this starting in many other places around the world, particularly in Europe. I think in the UK we have elements of this starting, or that have been kind of bubbling away for a couple of years. I think social media plays an insanely important part, and I do really worry in that regard. But we're going to look at a few points concerning what fascism is, and then see whether the US is qualifying as descending into fascistic governance and thinking. I'm going to be drawing a little bit from Jason Stanley's How Fascism Works and a Substack entry, which I think is pretty good. But I go and read books on the topic. I'm reading a book at the moment called The Strong Men by Ruth Ben-Hiat. I've read Madeleine Albright's Fascism, Jason Stanley's How Fascism Works, etc., etc. So there are lots of good sources to get thinking on this topic. I don't like this politics, therefore I'm going to call it fascist type thing. I think genuinely we have a situation whereby the United States is indeed I hope you're still there. Sorry, complete freeze there on my end of the computer. So yeah, I genuinely think that the US is starting, or not starting, is actually firmly on this Can you hear me now? This happened last time I did a live stream And I have a feeling that these days there's a gremlin in the system that is trying to stop me from saying what I'm trying to say, and all conspiracy theories abound. That's really irritating that just happened, but hopefully I'm back and you can hear me loud and clear. So what I was trying to say is that I really do believe that the US is going along this path, and there are many other nations that are tentatively following suit. And that is incredibly worrying. So let's start with a few pointers as to what fascism might look like. I now need to just sort my screen out again. So here we go. Right, we're going to start with Jason Stanley's 10 pillars of fascism. So in order to get to fascism, and remember, we are talking about the 21st century now. We're not talking about 1939 Germany. So you don't have to be wearing brown shirts around the country to be seen as a fascist. You can have a modern version of fascism that is built on these tenets. And what are these tenets? Well, I'm going to very quickly go through them because I've done this before. But one, the mythic past. So make America great again. It was great in some distant past or near distant past. We're not quite sure. It's a bit vague, but there's kind of mythology about this wonderful version of what, in this case, America was. So make America great again is to imply that America is not great now. It's broken, but it was great at some point in the past. But of course, these points in the past were points where slavery was fine, where you could rape in marriage, where you could, I don't know what the time was. It was so perfect, but it is some mythic past, right? Propaganda is utilized, manipulating the language of democratic ideals for authoritarian ends. A law and order campaign, for example, might be used to target specific minority groups. State-controlled or allied media sources are also used to shape public perception. 3, anti-intellectualism, attacking and devaluing education, universities being attacked, we've seen that. Experts and independent journalism, the tactic undermines rational debate and promotes leaders' pronouncements as the only legitimate source of truth. And we can see this with regards to preferring certain media types as well, and rejecting critical media and legacy media. Trump does that very, very well indeed. And that gets a propagandistic landscape around him, where he only has obsequious media types that just want to regurgitate what he says and not challenge him on anything. 4, unreality, replacing truth with the word of a single leader or party, which creates a reality based on lies and conspiracy theories. Examples include baseless claims about birtherism or election fraud, as we saw previously. That's what Jason Stanley talked about when he wrote this book during Trump 1.0. But actually now Trump just sits and lies on national television. And some things he said recently have been so extraordinarily bonkers and untrue that it beggars belief that no one challenges him on that. But of course, if he's changed the media landscape around him, then there is no one to challenge him. Hierarchy, promoting the idea that power is a natural and deserved right for certain groups, typically men over women, and a dominant racial or ethnic group over minorities, rather than a democratic concept of equality. You can see this in the armed forces. Pete Hegseth trying to reject now women in the armed forces, and it's all about the men. There's this kind of hierarchy of I guess this natural hierarchy where immigrant people are just not worth as much as, I guess, particularly white American people and white American citizens. And there's that natural sense of hierarchy going on there. Victimhood, cultivating a sense of grievance among the dominant group. The idea that you quite often hear that Christianity is oppressed in the US. And it's like, no, that's ridiculous. It's not oppressed. You have a privileged position of power, Christianity as a religion. The narrative is that they are victims whose status is threatened by minority groups. Oh, the woke left has been oppressing us. We can't even say Merry Christmas. That kind of stuff, which are falsely blamed for their problems. Law and order, using the rhetoric of law and order to justify state-sanctioned violence. We're going to be returning to this one, obviously, and suppression against political opponents and marginalized populations. This can involve extrajudicial punishment or a militarized police response to protests. Sexual anxiety, mobilizing against the supposed breakdown of traditional gender roles and sexual morality. You know, LGBTQ, transgender particularly. These are demonized groups that challenge the patriarchal norms and to stoke fear. There is a real
sense of otherization of the Sodom and Gomorrah appeal to the heartland. So portraying urban centers as corrupt and decadent and filled with other populations, while venerating rural areas as the keepers of pure traditional values, national values. This is quite interesting in that we saw this with Nazi Germany, the kind of harkening back to when Make America Great Again, Make Germany Great Again, when it was a bucolic heartland, rural urban divide there, where urban centers are seen as metropolitan and sexually degenerate areas full of, again, middle-class intellectual sorts of people who sit there abstractly talking about this and that whilst having sexual divergence and this and that. They're degrading all the ways. We want to get back to the real proper, sense of America, traditional rural values and Christian values and whatever. And then his last one was Arbeit macht frei, work shall make you free, promoting the weaponization of a work ethic to dismantle social welfare programs and justify the exploitation and brutalization of marginalized groups, often labeling them as lazy. But again, you can see this happening in the US with regard to the dismantling of welfare in terms of Medicaid, Medicare, so on and so forth, something that they're big on at the moment with a big, beautiful bill. Okay, so that is what Jason Stanley's list was. I just want to go through another list, which is slightly different, but really interesting. And this is also completely defended by, evidence written only in this last week. And this checklist is ultranationalism, blood and soil ideology. 2, violent suppression of the opposition. We're going to be talking about that a lot. 3, scapegoating of minorities and others. That's obviously part of this with, immigrants in particular, but again, LGBTQ, blah, blah, blah. 4, fusion of state and corporate power. Interesting. You can talk about social media companies. You can talk about tech companies. That, I think, is super important. 5, control of information and the attack on the press. 6, a rewriting of education and history. We're seeing that in certain states at the moment, trying to erase sort of black history to some degree. We've seen this in with Pete Hegseth in the Armed Forces, where they're taking down sort of pictures and references to taking it on websites, on Armed Forces websites, reference to, talking about the history of minorities and their role in the armed forces, so on and so forth. So the cult of personality and the strongman. Number 8 is rejection of democratic norms and institutions. Number 9 is a glorification of violence and militarism. And number 10 is nostalgia for a mythical golden age. So again, that's that kind of MAGA sense. So there are two people's interpretations of what is entailed with fascism, and certainly getting to fascism. So this is an ultra-nationalist or a very nationalist authoritarian state of governance in its very basic form. That's how we can see fascism as described. In fact, if I'm just to put in here a definition of fascism, here we go. We'll get, and I'll just bring this up in a second, share this instead. So definition of fascism, let's go to the Merriam-Webster. Populist political philosophy, movement or regime such as that of the fascists that exalts nation and often race above the individual, that is associated with a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, and that is characterized by severe economic and social regimentation and by forcible suppression of opposition. And I think that is where we are going with the United States, and to some degree, I think the United States is already there. Now, it's really interesting in the book Strongmen by Ruth Ben-Ghiat. She talks about how she focuses in that book on leaders who are democratically elected, but then backslide democracy to a point of authoritarian rule. And this is what's happened with so many around the world. It's what happened with Hitler. Not Xi Jinping, but people like Hitler, Viktor Orban's been trying that. Erdogan in Turkey. It's really interesting that she says that Trump has achieved, in a recent interview with Mark Elias on Democracy Talk here, Ruth Ben-Ghiat was saying that Trump has achieved more in 10 months than these leaderships. So if you're talking Erdogan and Orban have achieved in 10, 15 years. Like the rate of movement in the United States in terms of governance is absolutely staggering. So this is why people are saying this is 5-alarm fire moment for the United States. So let's just look at a couple of instances of people saying, right, we need to be dealing with these ideas of actual fascism, we shouldn't be afraid to talk about this. This is a Philadelphia Inquirer, of course, Chicago and nearby under nearby Chicago under a lot of pressure with the military there, and then Washington, and then now we're hearing Portland, and then of course California previously, the militarization of certain cities. Why can't we allow Trump to ban the other F word? The column the Trump regime wants to ban, America has to call out surging fascism in order to defeat it. The Donald Trump regime hasn't banned me from writing this column, at least I don't believe so, but top government officials have made it clear from sorry, my child is trying to phone me, from the president on down, that in their eyes, what I'm about to say is dangerous and un-American. In a series of speeches, tweets, and decrees from the Oval Office, the regime insists that the existential threat to our national way of life isn't from troops in the streets of American cities toting assault rifles and tear gassing peaceful citizens, but from protesters or writers like me calling that behavior out for what it really is, fascism. So you've got these accusations going both ways, that the protesters themselves are the fascist ones, but we need to be talking about these ideas and calling it out for I think what it is. Let's just listen to this Chicago CBS News Chicago chap talking.
And Erica, videos widely circulating online show what you just described. Federal agents appear to be throwing tear gas out of their car window. It happened just before noon. We're near the intersection of Central Park and Armitage, and it also happens to be in front of Funston Elementary School. And I want to give you an idea, a sense of what is happening here. We have seen a number of community members, dozens of them, showing up here around dismissal time. They are here as kids have been getting out of school and making sure that they get home safely. We have seen a number of these volunteers walking kids home who tell me that they're walking these specific kids home whose parents don't feel comfortable coming to get their kids from school today. But I want to give you a look at the video from this morning.
So what we're going to do a little bit later is I'm going to show you a lot of these videos of these kinds of incidents. I mean, this is Chicago. There's an awful lot going on in Chicago. But there is this idea that they want to cause mass riots. So actually, this is almost like a state agent provocateur type scenario, where if you call mass riots, then it gives, if you send the military into these places like Portland, where there really isn't any reason to do so, right? And then it starts to foment discontent, and you start getting pushback, and then you start getting riots, and you say, look, it justifies us having the armed forces here, even though it was the armed forces being there that started the riots. Then you can say, we need the armed forces here, and now we're going to call martial law. And then now that we're seeing that the polls are looking really bad in the, political polls are looking really bad for the Republicans at the moment, and all the special elections have pointed towards Democrats overperforming really, really significantly, then it's looking very, very bad for the November midterm elections. Then maybe if we can call martial law, then we don't have to allow the midterms to go ahead, or that we keep calling emergency measures into play, and then we can unilaterally decide things from the executive, from Donald Trump in the White House, and he can decide to do things. And as a result, we can bypass Congress, and the whole situation looks less and less democratic, and it looks more and more like a single unitary leader making dictatorial decisions, which is autocracy, which with all of these other things looks rather like fascism. So the question is, are these military are these decisions to send military units into cities a decision that isn't to quell violence and to quell crime, but actually to foment violence in order to make further decisions down the line? I'm just going to go to a couple of things that Donald Trump has just recently said himself. So this is at a pretty extraordinary event where he's on an aircraft carrier, and he's giving a political, already we've seen this at Fort Bragg, we've seen this in a number of places where he tries to give political rallies to the military, which is a big no-no. It never used to happen. And now Donald Trump is doing that, trying to get cheering, baying audiences to have a go at the Democrats. He even, to all the commanders and generals, talked about the Democrat cities being, the problem here. So he is trying to mobilize, not only to try to physically mobilize the armed forces to go into particularly blue cities, political opposition, militarizing against the political opposition, I would argue, but he's also trying to generate a fervor amongst people in the military to support his political agenda. And I think that's insanely dangerous. Like, if this sort of stuff had happened with his political rallies in front of military personnel, this has happened under previous governments, people would have gone absolutely spare. But so much is happening at the moment that it's hard to keep up. And seriously, the media cannot cope at the moment with the sheer volume of what Trump and his administration is doing.
But we have to take care of this little gnat that's on our shoulder called the Democrats. They want to give all of our money to illegal aliens that pour into the country.
So first of all, he's lying. So we go back to the unreality. So this is not at all what's going on. The government is shut down, and Trump says, well, that it's shut down, and not just Trump. We've seen this from Mike Johnson, from basically anyone rolled out onto TV. They say the Democrats are not agreeing to budgetary negotiations because they have this ridiculous demand that Medicaid and Medicare is going to be paid out to illegal immigrants, and that is simply not true. And they've pointed this out time and time again, that is not within the purview of the law. It cannot be done, and yet they're saying this time and time again. So not only have we got this element of unreality and lying, but he's talking to a ship full of sailors about how the the administration and you, the military, have to take care of this little gnat on the shoulder called the Democrats. He is, I mean, honestly, like, don't dismiss stuff like this. This is fascistic. Like, imagine Keir Starmer in the UK came out and said, right, went to some military base and gave a talk to the military and says, we guys need to get rid of a problem we've got called the Conservative Party, or called Reform UK. Everyone would go insane, and rightly so. You have the President of the United States here calling on the military to stand against the political opposition. This is absolutely outrageous.
But we have to take care of this little gnat that's on our shoulder called the Democrats. They want to give all of our money to illegal aliens that pour into the country. And, I have a bigger heart than they do. But the problem is, when you do that, they come in by the millions. Everybody wants that, so you can't do it. But I've also pledged the largest ever investment in our military's history. We're spending over $1 trillion. We've never had anything like that before. $1 trillion on our military, and that includes, along with your Secretary of the Navy and Pete Hegseth, we're going to be building lots of ships and doing a lot of things that you haven't seen happen for.
Okay, so there's this kind of ramping up of the military, but also this political talk in front of the military, and I think that is incredibly scary. Mehdi Hassan here says he's speaking to the military here. If this was any other president, it would be a national scandal that rocked his administration and party, but for some reason many Dems and much of the liberal media keep giving him a pass. As he says, we have to take care of this little gnat that's called that's on our shoulder, called the Democrats. Now we are starting to see some people actually recognize this for the seriousness that I think we're confronted with, or people in America. This is Gavin Newsom. Now, love him or hate him, whatever, he's very divisive, particularly with the right. He is pretty much the only Democrat that's coming out and saying, dudes, we have a problem here. Like, he said this recently on Stephen Colbert show, where he came out and said, I am seriously worried for our democracy, and I'm not 100% sure we're going to have the midterms in 2026. And this is what he just said.
This is it. This is it. We're losing this country. We're losing it in real time. This is a chaos presidency. He is a wrecking ball. This is unlike anything we've experienced in our lifetime. It is code red. No time for neutrality. It's time to stand up, pick a side, and be firm and resolute. That's what we're calling for.
Governor, last question.
Code red. He's saying it is code red time now. I'm going to go to, I mean, someone you wouldn't normally think to listen to. This is Rob Reiner, you know, just come out with the new movie, Spinal Tap movie, right? But I think he's telling it like it is.
This is just the beginning, and people have to understand our democracy is being taken away from us, and we only have about a year. You know, just to be clear about this, and people, you know, you're doing a great job, and a lot of other people are doing a good job to tell people what is actually happening in this country. But make no mistake, we have a year before this country becomes a full-on autocracy and democracy completely leaves us. And we're looking at the election in 2026, and Donald Trump knows. He knows that in a free and fair election, he will lose. He will lose the House. The House will flip and will become into Democratic hands. There'll be committee chairs that'll be able to hold hearings. And this is the last thing he wants. So this little, you know, these ICE agents and the National Guard, and now he's called the military in from all over the world to talk to them about, don't be surprised when polling booths are surrounded by American military in the guise of making sure that the elections are fair and that nobody's tampering with anything. And when you see violence breaking out, which there'll be protests, there'll be inciting violence, there'll be some violence, and they'll kick back. Then you'll see the commandeering of voting machines, ballot boxes, to make sure that that election is secure. Well, what that means is that he will then commandeer the election. So we have to make the public absolutely aware that their democracy is being taken from them. And we have to do everything we can to make sure people understand that. People don't, it's a vague term, democracy. It's like, what does that mean? The Constitution, we don't know what that means. People care about their pocketbook issues, the price of eggs, they care about their health care, and they should. Those are the things that directly affect them. But if they lose their democracy, all of these rights, the freedom of speech, the freedom to pray the way you want, the freedom to protest and not go to jail, not be sent out of the country with no due process, all these things will be taken away from them. And we have to educate the public that this is what's happening right now in America.
In fact, and I think that was really well set out there by Rob Reiner. And so this is, in my opinion, it's a genuine worry. But let's listen to some, like Scott Adams, the cartoonist Scott Adams, now saying the best form of government would be the authoritarian strongman who had your best interests at heart, which turns out to be Trump. You've got Scott Adams, who I do not like. I mean, he's gone off the deep end. But he is now saying that essentially, we need an authoritarian strongman, and that is Trump. So one of Trump's biggest supporters that you hear about, Scott Adams is very often sounding off, saying that Trump is the authoritarian strongman. As this source says, after calling us deranged for a decade, conservatives are now openly admitting that we were right all along. Trump is an authoritarian. The difference between left and right is that the left don't want to live under the boot of a tyrant. The right accepts a boot gladly, says this person. But it's the admission from certain conservatives themselves. I don't even call them conservatives, actually. Trumpians are. Some of them do admit that he is an authoritarian, but it's all right because he's their authoritarian. Now, I do want to just add a couple of nuggets in here that alongside this, I also don't think that Donald Trump is all there at the moment. And so a lot of this is coming from people like Stephen Miller and the people around him. I think Donald Trump loves power. He is authoritarian. At least he really wants to be. He's always wanted to be an authoritarian. That's why he liked being on The Apprentice so much. But I don't know that he's got the political nous to be able to get him there. What he has is people around him that will do that for him. But it's not because they love Donald Trump so much. It's because Donald Trump is a vehicle that allows them to get every single policy that they want. Project 2025 is what these guys want. Donald Trump doesn't really know what, he's not read 900 pages of Project 2025. Like, he just has some kind of headline ideas of what these guys want through speaking to them, no doubt. But essentially, he is the megaphone through which these guys shout. They whisper into his head all sorts of sweet nothings, and then Trump shouts that out into the public. But anyway, this is Donald Trump talking again on the aircraft carrier.
A man that everybody loves. He was my doctor in the White House, and I got to know him very well. He was also the doctor for Barack Hussein Obama. Have you heard of him? And he was the doctor for a man named Bush. And at a press conference, they asked him, who's in the best shape? Who's the healthiest? Who's the strongest? Who's the best physical specimen of the three? He said, that's easy. President Donald Trump. And I said, I love this guy. I said, I love him.
What's interesting about that, I mean, he's obviously not in as good a physical shape as either Bush or Obama. And he's had health troubles. He's got massive ankles. He's got, you know, he's had injections into him with IV drips or whatever. He is not healthy. There's no way the man is healthy. But it's the interesting bit at the end there when he says, I like this guy. He loves anyone who says how wonderful he is. That's how narcissistic he is. And I think that little speech just gives you a window into exactly who this man is. You whisper sweet nothings to Trump, or you say very clearly, very obsequious stuff to Donald Trump, and he will love you for it. Mehdi Hassan says, no sane person believes Donald Trump is in better shape than Barack Obama. No sane person talks about themselves like this in public. And note the racist jibe at Obama. He can't stop being racist, ever. And we're going to go to one more little comment here. This is from Donald Trump. This is another problem as well, because this is a reflection of the unreality that Trump is wanting, or his team is really happy to express, where he just lies overtly. And actually, they all lie. They're all lying all the time at the moment. This idea that the Democrats just want to give Medicare, free medical care to immigrants is just not what the debate has been over. But they are selling it as that. They don't mind lying at all to get what they want. This is Trump talking absolute nonsense, and I'll tell you why it's absolute nonsense.
Politically correct anymore. And history will never forget that it was the SEALs who stormed the compound at Osama bin Laden and put a bullet in his head. Remember that? And please remember, I wrote about Osama bin Laden exactly 1 year ago, 1 year before he blew up the World Trade Center. And I said, you got to watch Osama bin Laden. And the fake news would never let me get away with whatever the hell the title, I can't tell you. But I can tell you there's a page in there devoted to the fact that I saw somebody named Osama bin Laden, and I didn't like it, and you got to take care of him. They didn't do it. A year later, he blew up the World Trade Center. So you got to take a little credit, because nobody else is going to give it to me. You know,
what is he talking about? So he's saying a year before the World Trade Center was blown up, Donald Trump was telling people, oh, you got to watch Osama bin Laden. No one knew who he was. He wasn't really on the radar then, but Donald Trump knew. And not only did he know then, but he told Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth was a 20-year-old college kid a year before 9/11. That is just a massive lie. There is no truth in that whatsoever. And yet he can stand in front of an aircraft carrier full of sailors and before the world on TV and just spout this unreality. It's just nonsense. What the effing F is this maniac talking about? He told Pete Hegseth about Osama bin Laden a year before 9/11. Pete Hegseth was a 20-year-old college kid a year before 9/11. Trump needs to be removed from office. He's completely lost it. It is pretty troubling. So, wow, if I'm reading this correctly, Trump was not kept in the loop as his accomplices cut nearly $200 million in law enforcement funding, the largest defunding of the police action in New York in decades. Kristi Noem should resign or be fired over this. This is a quote here. Mr. Trump was first told of the cuts by Ms. Hochul during a phone call on Sunday evening, according to 3 people with knowledge of the situation. Now, you don't need to know about the full details of this, but the idea is, and I've been reporting on this over the months, is that Trump doesn't have a clue what is going on in his administration. Decisions are made without his knowledge, and then he gets trotted out and he gets asked about stuff, and he either says, I don't know about this, or when did you hear about that, or I'll look into that, I'll get someone to blah blah blah. He doesn't really know what's going on. When he talks in terms of foreign policy, in terms of Ukraine and Russia, he doesn't have the requisite knowledge of Ukraine, of the history, the culture, the war, what's going on the front, to be able to make the decisions he's supposedly making. The point here is that I don't think Trump is making these decisions. And I think most of what is going on is just the Heritage Foundation. And he gets told about things later. Now, remember all the times that we've seen him sign executive orders that are getting passed to him by the people who are responsible for those executive orders. And they tell him what he's signing. And he goes, oh, that's a good one, that is. Like, he's not sat in meetings saying, we need to do this. He's not driving policy. Now, this is... governance is always a collaborative effort where you have your SPADs and your experts and your aides and your departments are like, we think this should happen. But then you're talking with the president and the president's aides. So the president has some kind of involvement there in a decision-making process and a policy creation. Whereas I don't think Trump is at all in these conversations. They are deciding things. Heritage Foundation is deciding things, and they're passing it to Trump, and Trump signs it on camera and asks, what's in this one? And he goes, oh, that sounds really, really good. Yeah, I like that one. You're now starting to get more and more of this as well. The president is unhinged. Quote, the president is unhinged. Trump's online behavior grows increasingly odd. So he's been sharing weird AI videos that are just deeply, deeply, I think, inappropriate for the president of the United States to be sharing. He's sharing AI-generated conspiracy theory nonsense, which has no place to be spread at all by the president. But and so either, again, it's people around him controlling his feeds, spreading stuff that they hadn't really vetted, or it's him spreading absolute nonsense, which means you need your head checked. This is all incredibly worrying. So, well, I could get, I've got so much to go through. I won't go through this too much, but the idea is that there are people around him that recognize that he's unhinged. And do you know what? When Representative, what's her name, Dean, you know, the woman that was in the corridor with Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and she said he's unhinged and unwell. And Mike Johnson nods his head and then says, yeah, well, you've got people in your party like that. He doesn't at all say, no, Trump is not. He nods his head and says, effectively, yes, he is, but you've got that too. In other words, the Speaker of the House of Representatives recognizes that Donald Trump is both unhinged and unwell. That is a problem. Okay, now let's get back onto kind of the sort of things that you would expect if you had a dictator in charge, or someone that really wanted to be a dictator and wanted to take the country towards fascism. Right, so remember I talk about these two pots and I talk about abductive reasoning. It's this idea that you have, and I'm going to be quite simplistic and digital, but life isn't strictly like this, usually a spectrum. But the idea is that every bit of data we look at with regard to what's going on with Trump, what he says, what he does, what the people around him say and do, the actions of the government, do they fit into the pot that is what you would expect if the government was looking to become transparent, anti-corruption, looking to uphold the democratic ideals of the nation, to look after freedoms and liberties of all of the nation, etc., etc.? Or does it go into the pot that is pro-corruption, pro-concentrating power in a single entity at the top, the executive, like the unified executive theory, where you kind of get rid of Congress and your judiciary, or you make them less important and you concentrate their powers into the White House? That is what the Project 2025 is seeking to do. That's one of their intentions in the unified executive theory. Is this about a lack of transparency? Is this about maintaining in power, past 2028, when we know he shouldn't be able to run again, but yet he's got all these caps saying Trump 2028, and he's getting people like Lindsey Graham to normalize the concept of him running past 2028, not even running, like he just maintains power past 2028. Like, he is telling you, he's printing t-shirts and caps, right, to talk about this. Like, the question is, which pot do you put all of these data points in? Is it the autocracy pot or the democracy pot? That's what we're going to seek to do for the rest of this video. And I've done this a lot with you previously, so this is adding on to all the myriad things I previously already said. Now, and I'm sorry I don't have time to go through all of your comments. So much content to get through. So we have this. The idea is that he is going to supposedly put his face on a coin. But the problem is, this is actually illegal. So the Treasury, according to Politico, is planning to mint a $1 coin featuring Trump's face for America's 250th anniversary. Welcome to the Banana Republic. Now, if this is indeed true, and one assumes it probably is, if Politico is reporting it, no US coin has ever featured a sitting president. The law specifically bars it in order to avoid authoritarian vibes. Think about it. That's 31 US Code 5112D2. Now, is this the sort of thing you would expect if you were talking about a dictatorial leader or a democratic leader? So that's a question. What pot would you put that in? Because that's going in the autocracy pot for me. Now, just weeks after nearly every Republican swore to us that Trump wasn't trying to use the FCC to silence dissent. So remember, we had Jimmy Kimmel, that was silenced, cancelled, whatever. There was that pressure from Brendan Carr, the guy in charge of the FCC, who put pressure on the licensors for Disney's ABC, the Jimmy Kimmel live show. It was then cut out of those, Nexstar and Sinclair, out of their, they cut the show for their audiences, and ABC then cancelled it, or at least suspended it, but people were unsure how long it was going to go on for. But that came from Brendan Carr, really. That was the pressure put on those entities by Brendan Carr, and he said it out loud, right? And everyone's got, that's on video. Here we now have President Donald Trump calling for the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, to look into the broadcast licenses of ABC and NBC. Again, is this what you would put it in a pot? Is this the democracy pot, the transparency pot, or is it the autocracy corruption pot? Which pot does this go into? I knew Al Sharpton for many years, says Trump. Not that it matters, but he was a major Trump fan. He had asked me to go to his fake rallies all the time because I brought big crowds and he couldn't get anybody to come with me. Then he did the Tawana Brawley hoax, one of the worst low-level scams in history, and that set him back big time. Then he got to know Brian Roberts, chairman of Fake News NBC, who gave him what would become one of the lowest rated shows in television history. Roberts is afraid to take him off because it wouldn't be politically correct. This is just one of the many reasons that the Federal Communications Commission should look into the license of NBC, which shows almost exclusive positive Democrat content. Likewise, ABC Fake News, about the same thing, 97% negative to Republicans. He is pressuring the FCC to look into the licenses of two news broadcasters. What pot do you put that into? Okay, what pot do you put this into? Is this the autocracy pot or the democracy pot? To ICE, says Donald Trump, Border Patrol, law enforcement, and all US military, as per my August 25th, 2025 executive order, which is again unilateral decision from the government bypassing Congress. Please be advised that from this point forward, anyone burning the American flag will be subject to 1 year in prison. You will be immediately arrested. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, you may be a patriot, right? And you may hate to see the American flag being burned. I don't like seeing the Union flag of the UK being burned by people in the UK. However, that is a First Amendment right. Okay, you might think it's an action, but it's really an extension of a kind of freedom of speech. It is an extension of speech, isn't it? Like, you're burning the flag. It is my freedom to do something like this. It's not like I'm allowed to burn things, but it's a fact it's a flag. So this is a freedom of speech issue. So you might not like it happening, but you should surely defend the right for that to happen if you really do believe in freedom. Otherwise, this to me is this is going in the autocracy bucket here. Trump is declaring that you will go to prison for 1 year, that he's decided that unilaterally. Congress hasn't decided that. The judiciary hasn't decided the sentence in there. This is the President of the United States announcing unilaterally on his own social media platform that he uses. So again, that's breaking the emoluments clause, in my opinion. He should not be allowed to use his own social media platform as the single way that he generates his messaging, that he amplifies his messaging, that he conducts his messaging. So in order to listen to what Donald Trump says, you have to have an account on True Social and advertising revenue and so on and so forth. So that is already corrupt. The fact that he's a president and messages through True Social. So that's a problem. That goes in the wrong pot. But then he's saying that if you burn the flag, I'm deciding you're going to go to prison for 1 year, even though that is a First Amendment right. Okay. So Trump has sought emergency intervention by the Supreme Court 28 times in the first 8 months of his new term, more than Bush, Obama, and Biden did combined in 20 years. In 10 months, Trump has called an emergency, effectively, called on emergency intervention by the Supreme Court more times in 10 months than 3 presidents did in 20 years. Does that go in the autocracy concentrated power pot, or does that go into the democracy pot where you'd hopefully be using all the different elements of government that tries to break up the power from a single autocratic entity, and where you have power within Congress, for example? Gary Kasparov says everything will be called an emergency until total control is established. Once that happens, it doesn't matter what you call it anymore, because you don't have the power for jack shit. Now, I want you to listen to this carefully. This is insanely scary. Again, what pot do you put this into? Democracy or autocracy? And I'll be really interested if there are, Trump supporters out there watching this. Like, how do you deal with this information? Like, do you begrudgingly admit that he's looking pretty autocratic, but it's not a problem because he's my guy? Or do you begrudgingly admit he's looking autocratic and say, I feel uncomfortable with this? Do you reject his rule now outright? Or do you jump through hoops to try and justify all of this happening? Which one are you if you're a Trump supporter? Now listen to your man here.
I need you to pay attention to what I'm going to say, and I want you to save or share this because some platforms are going to try to take it down or bury it. This is NSPM7, Countering Domestic Terrorism and Organized Political Violence, and it just got signed. And buried inside of it are a series of traps. It says the government can treat anti-American, anti-capitalist, and anti-Christian views as indicators of political violence. This allows them to target people they will label as potentially politically violent. The goal of NSPM7 is to give the government the authority to arrest and charge people before they actually do anything illegal. This is about ideology. And pay attention, because NSPM7 broadly gives them the authority to label and arrest anyone who supports the overthrow of the US government, supports extremism on migration, supports extremism on race or gender, and it also includes going after people who have hostility towards those who hold traditional American values on family, hostility for those who hold traditional American views on religion, and hostility for those who hold traditional American views on morality. And they slipped in civil disorder, which can mean almost anything. All those statements are very broad and ambiguous, and that's by design. When dissent is defined as anti-American, any protest can be labeled anti-American. Question capitalism, you're an anti-capitalist. Criticize Christian nationalism or religion in schools, you're anti-Christian. It's not an accident. Broad language is a weapon. Suppose ICE kicks in some doors in a city and there's a protest, and if you join, even peacefully, they could call that anti-American or civil disorder. You call out a corporation for exploitative practices, they could call that anti-capitalist. Criticize Christian political ideology, you're anti-Christian. This gives them cover to stretch definitions however they want. The worst part, you won't see it instantly, and that's how authoritarian change happens. One day you'll wake up and say, why can't I say this? Or since when is that illegal? This is the playbook. Once they have the cover to treat thought and ideology as threat, they escalate. Surveillance of dissidents and organizers, prosecutions under broad terrorism labels, deploying federal forces inside cities, media and speech control, purging or silencing dissent. I'm not asking you to panic. I'm asking you to fucking pay attention. Don't just shrug and scroll. Share this. Demand your media talk about it. Don't normalize repression, because in a year or 2 or 5, you're going to wake up and look around and think, I should have paid attention. And by then, it's too late. We have to continue to resist before the door slams shut. And if you want to follow me on any other platform, same hand.
Okay, so I think that is super, super scary. Now, talking about scary people, this is 17-year-old Stephen Miller. And if you haven't seen the previous video of Stephen Miller when he was, I wonder if it's here actually, Stephen Miller when he was 17 standing up in his high school, you get an understanding of who Stephen Miller is. Now, he's a guy, deputy policy chief at the White House. This is what he was like at the age of 17.
To the issue of the Iraqi civilians, I think that as many of them should survive as possible, because the goal of any military conflict is to kill as few people as possible. But as for Saddam Hussein and his henchmen, I think the ideal solution would be to cut off their fingers. I don't think it's necessary to kill them entirely. We're not a barbaric people. We respect life. Therefore, torture is the way to go, because torture people can live. Torture is a celebration of life and human dignity. We need to remember that as we enter these very dark and dangerous times in the next century. And I only hope that many of my peers and people who will be leading this country will appreciate the value and respect that torture shows towards other cultures. I was talking to my doctor the other day, and I said to him, well, you know, I'm 17, I'm pretty sexy. Everything's going the way I want it to. You know, I play good tennis, but something's just not going right. My hair is just receding. I look like I'm 35, and a balding 35-year-old at that. Thank you, Jonas. And he said, well, how much sleep are you getting? And I said, excuse me, what's sleep? Apparently, you're supposed to go to bed at nighttime. Usually, I sit in my room like this. Ha! 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 Ha!
Anyway, that is Stephen Miller as a young kid. And actually, if you sorry, I have now got rid of that, but let me find that again, because if you yeah, there we go. If you look at what he said, if we go Miller janitor, you'll understand who this guy is. And yeah, here it is. This is the one. So this is Stephen Miller, again, at the same sort of time. This is the guy that is running the White House, by the way. The reason I'm playing you this is because he is super important.
Am I the only one who is sick and tired of being told to pick up my trash? And we have plenty of janitors who are paid to do it for us. Am I the
only one who's sick and tired of being told to pick up my trash when we have plenty of janitors that are paid to do that for us? The idea that I shouldn't take responsibility of my own behavior at all. We should just have other people to do that for us. Well, that's actually the opposite of individualism. I guess. Well, no, it's the height of individualism, isn't it? It's like, and yeah, it's a bit of a contradiction. But anyway, like that to me is just an insanely kind of selfish person. Yeah, but that is Stephen Miller. So now that is our segue onto Stephen Miller, because it's super important to understand how the US is descending into fascism and who is delivering that. And I say it is this man. He is the man. Stephen Miller has now declared this Trump-appointed judge an insurrectionist. To emphasize, the judge painstakingly examined all the protests happening in Portland before Trump activated the guard. She noted that there hadn't been any violence at the protests since mid-July. Stephen Miller says, legal insurrection. The president is a commander-in-chief of the armed forces, not an Oregon judge. Portland and Oregon law enforcement, at the direction of local leaders, have refused to aid ICE officers facing relentless terrorist assault and threats to life. Really? We're going to look at this in a minute about as to whether ICE officers in Oregon have faced relentless terrorist assaults and threat to life. There are more local law enforcement officers in Oregon than there are guns and badges in the FBI nationwide. This is an organized terrorist attack on the federal government and its officers, and the deployment of troops is an absolute necessity to defend our personnel, our laws, our government, public order, and the republic itself. You know, in reply to Judge Immergut, granting a restraining order that prevents Trump's mobilization of the Oregon National Guard in Portland. So that there is no need for this. You don't know what's going on. But what Stephen Miller appears to be doing, and we'll get to this in a minute, is that he's telling Donald Trump that Oregon is on fire and it's all terrible and there are all these riots. And that is not true. It is not happening. Then Trump goes, oh my goodness, let's send in the troops. Do you remember Trump, and I played you this, he spoke to Oregon's governor the other day and she said that, as was reported by NBC, I spoke to the governor. She was very nice. And she said, that's not going on. I said, well, that's not what I'm seeing. It's not what my people are telling me. And it's this idea. He admitted in public that he was just going on what his people were telling him. And he was under the impression that Oregon was on fire because I presume he's been looking at 2020 footage of the BLM riots in Oregon from 5 years ago. And of course, that is not what's going on there. This is just super dangerous. And when you take into account what your man just here was saying on the new regulations that changed so that you can begin to oppress those who are anti-Christian, what you think is the national, I don't know, agenda, identity. If you're anti-capitalist, if you can be seen as a kind of terrorist. Well, that is what Stephen Miller is suggesting here, that all opposition are terrorists and we should be able to send in the armed forces, etc., etc. Jim Stewartson says Stephen Miller is going to execute a purge of the Democratic Party and a justice system based on his illegal, unconstitutional memo, NSPM7, the one that we just heard talked about. He has collapsed the Democrats, far-left Democrat judges and Antifa into a single domestic terror threat as a pretext for mass arrests. Stephen Miller, the issue before us now is very simple and clear. There is a large and growing movement of left-wing terrorism in the country. It is well organized and funded, and it is shielded by the far-left Democrat judges, prosecutors, and attorneys general. The only remedy is to use legitimate state power to dismantle terrorism and terror networks. In other words, he wants to dismantle the judiciary that he feels is against him and the political opposition that he feels is against him. And they're changing the rules in order to do that and militarizing society in order to do that. The Democrat Party has filled our legal and judicial system with radicals who protect left-wing terrorists. This is, in other words, they are terrorists themselves, as NSPM7 suggests. This is a very real and dire crisis for our Republican form of government. Then he's responding to DHS announces federal agents in Broadview, Illinois, were random boxed in by 10 cars, including a woman armed with a semi-automatic gun who had posted an online threat to F up ICE and was flagged in a CBP intel bulletin. DHS says she fired on her. I think that is also not been... I think, if I'm correct, the woman they're talking about was arrested and they didn't file any of that information in what they said against her. In other words, that wasn't correct. So he's like, this is domestic terrorism and seditious insurrection. So now he's starting to talk about insurrection. See where this goes. Dear Antifa, says Homeland Security, reposted by Stephen Miller. We are just getting started as they show someone being detained by military personnel there. And super, super scary. A Trump-appointed judge is warning about this. So this is Immigrant warned. So this is what Stephen Miller was regaling against, right? The judge says, furthermore, this country has a long-standing and foundational tradition of resistance to government overreach, especially in the form of military intrusion into civic affairs. That tradition has deep roots in our history and found early expression, for example, in the constitutional provisions for civilian control of the military, Laird versus Tatum, blah, 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 blah. James Madison addressed to the Constitutional Convention, 1787, reprinted in blah, 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 blah. A standing military force with an overgrown executive will not long be safe companions to liberty. The means of defense against foreign danger have been always the instruments of tyranny at home. So you start using, and this is me now, you start using your military at home, this is no friend of liberty. You've given up your freedoms there. The historical tradition boils down to a simple proposition. This is a nation of constitutional law, not martial law. Defendants have made a range of arguments that, if accepted, risk blurring the line between civil and military federal power to the detriment of this nation. So again, all of this, does it go into the autocracy pot or the democracy pot? Stephen Miller, again, legal insurrection, the president's commander-in-chief, blah, blah, blah. As we've heard him say already, in response to that immigrant ruling, Mehdi Hassan says this dude gets more Goebbels-like by the day in his inflammatory rhetoric and over-the-top claims. And now he's attacking a Trump-appointed judge for legal insurrection. It's bonkers. And by the way, that immigrant ruling that we've just talked through, that was a Trump-appointed judge, right? So it's not just any old liberal. Now, Chris Murphy then says this dystopian video that we're just about to see is previewing a violent takeover, not a targeted law enforcement action. It's insane. Trump is militarizing our cities to stoke violence, not to reduce it. These are tried and true tactics of authoritarians, plain and simple. So this is the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security posting this propaganda video for the DHS. Again, would you put this sort of video in the autocracy or the democracy bucket?
Don't push. Get out of the way for the Bearcat. Clear the way for the Bearcat. More hands.
So on and so forth. Like, I'm all for robust law enforcement following due process, and I'm all for funding them properly, but also funding the causes of, or funding, sorry, not the causes of crime, funding mitigation of the causes of crime, looking at social programs that would stop people committing crimes in the first place. But this kind of sticking plaster of sending the military in, or militarizing border patrols, border agents, to the point where they are now funded to the tune of the 16th biggest armed force in the world. That's ISIS funding. This is scary stuff. As someone says in the live chat, this is the Purge in real life. Like, have you seen the Purge films? It's basically what it looks like. I mean, I could show you the rest of that, but it's similar sort of stuff. Again, is that the democracy or autocracy bucket that we put it in? Brendan Friedman, everyone is trying to have a normal Saturday night, and the president's top advisor, Stephen Miller, is on Twitter announcing that civil war is necessary. That's that previous message from Stephen Miller. Timothy Snyder, the historian of like sort of Russia and Ukraine and kind of looks into fascism, has written an amazing book on tyranny. This Trump administration policy of generating an artificial civil war. So again, this goes back to fomenting the violence in the first place on the basis of big lies is of course meant to be frightening, but it is also anti-American, unlawful, stupid, and pursued by wildly unpopular people. However, it is having an effect. So Stephen Miller saying the issue before us now is very simple and clear. There is a large and growing movement of left-wing terrorism in this country. It is well organized and funded, and it is shielded by far-left Democrat judges. I'm rereading this because now something else has happened. It is shielded by far-left Democrat judges, prosecutors, and attorneys general. The only remedy is to use legitimate state power to dismantle terrorism and terror networks. So he is calling out these judges, right, and saying that effectively these liberal judges are the enemy. So there is a judge called Diane Goldstein, right, who blocked the Trump administration. Stephen Miller tweeted this, and then last night this happened. This is her house. Absolutely incredible. So although I don't know the full details of this, the people in the house had to jump out into the water to survive. So South Carolina judge Diane Goodstein's home is burning to the ground after an apparent explosion. Now, are we justified in joining the dots? I don't know. But it seems pretty coincidental that this judge has been criticized. Judges in general are being criticized if they have a liberal bent and have been called out by Stephen Miller. And then we hear that liberal judge, South Carolina Judge Diane Goodstein's home is burning to the ground after an explosion. SLED is investigation as arson and refer the attack as Judge Goodstein has been receiving multiple threats. Her husband, a former state senator, is in hospital as a result of that. Jesus effing C, says Adam Cochran. The judge had put blocks against the Trump admin, which Trump and Miller screeched about. Just yesterday, Miller's response to this judge's decision was claiming that the judiciary is shielding terrorism and that it should be dismantled. And the next day, her home blows up in a fiery explosion. What is going on here? It's absolutely staggering. The husband of South Carolina judge had to jump out of a window after helping others escape, fracturing several bones in his hips, feet, and legs. I'm not jumping to conclusions, says Chris Mallory, until we know more. But if the roles were reversed, MAGA would be going apeshit. So someone else says this sweaty online lust to obliterate the judicial system and declare martial law is genuinely disgusting stuff. Elon Musk saying, essential to Erin Doherty, who's a right-wing influencer, saying we need to Bukele our court system. Bukele is the leader of El Salvador. He's become a dictator now by getting the judiciary under his control. Then, of course, having that El Salvador prison that the Americans are buying into. We need to Bukele our court system. Watch how quickly the country is fixed. Elon Musk says it's essential. And then the next day, a judge's house burns down. Meanwhile, Stephen Miller is saying all the stuff that he's saying. It's absolutely incredible. Then we hear that George Soros is being targeted as a funder. These kind of donors and funders of the political opposition go back to the original, pillars of how fascism works. And you go after the opposition with political violence or indeed using the judiciary, using law and order, go after the funding. Billionaire ticks all the boxes on the anti-Semitic scorecard as Trump attacks Democratic contributors before the midterms. Trump sets his sight on liberal mega donor George Soros, a chilling message to other donors. So the US president said, if you look at Soros, he's at the top of everything. And of course, there's really no evidence that he is the person that he is claimed to be by people on the conservative right. So he's long been the bogeyman for the right. But actually, this comes from Viktor Orban. So this originates from the relationship between Viktor Orban and CPAC, the Conservative Action Conference, Political Action Conference. So he is the nemesis of Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban through Tucker Carlson and Tucker Carlson's dad, who sits on the board of the lobbying firm for Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban then gets, red carpet treatment by Trump at Mar-a-Lago, gets to turn up to CPAC conferences, both in Budapest and in the US several times. It's not surprising that the political enemy, George Soros, who funded a university, I think Central European University in Hungary, until that was closed down by Viktor Orban. He is the enemy of Viktor Orban because he's liberal and a Jew, essentially. And then this guy is now the enemy of the political right in the United States. But it originally, I would claim, came from Viktor Orban. Now they're going after him because of his funding in the Democratic Party. So, the way that you oppress your political opposition is by, going after the opposition themselves, going after the judiciary that supports those ideals, and going after the funders. And then eventually you don't have a political opposition. And then, what happens? You've got an autocracy. You've got a dictator. That is what is going on. Now, this is Donald Trump, and I find this incredibly scary. There are several videos of him doing this.
We're going to look at that. It was amazing. Portland is burning to the ground.
So his claim is Portland is burning to the ground. That is why he's sending the troops in. The claim is Portland is burning to the ground. As far as I'm aware, not a single thing has burnt in Portland, certainly since July, when there was the last sort of outbreak of some discontent there. We're in October now. Portland is not burning to the ground. But that is his justification for sending in the National Guard, for sending in the troops.
Portland is burning to the ground. It's insurrectionists all over the place. It's Antifa. And yet the politicians who are petrified. Look, the politicians are afraid for their lives. That's the only reason that they say, like, there's nothing happening. And you've seen it. The place is burning down, and they
You've seen it. The place is burning down.
pretend like there's nothing happening. So we'll take a look at the order. We haven't seen the order yet.
So this is what is so worrying. This is the unreality part of it, is that he actually thinks Portland is burning down and he's sending in the soldiers. Who is making these decisions and who is telling him it's burning down? This is insanely dangerous. Honestly, insanely dangerous. This is supposedly what Portland looks like today. Ron Wyden, who is a Portland senator, he's the Oregon senator. It was a beautiful Sunday in Portland. Farmers markets, the Portland Marathon, peaceful protests, and some views of Mount Hood. This city is vibrant, peaceful, and resilient. We do not need federal occupation, and we sure as hell don't want one. So how can you have a marathon taking place in a city that is burning to the ground? How can you have farmers markets taking place in a city that is burning to the ground? These are the protests. You're going to see the protests in a second. I think they've got people in those blown up suits and whatnot. The Portland Frog, which has been pepper sprayed. We're going to come to that in a wee while. Farmers markets. Yeah, it's just, I don't think there it is. So these, you've got some protesters there, but it's not like you think it is if you're listening to Donald Trump. Nearly 12,000 people braved the war-ravaged streets of Portland, Oregon to run in today's marathon. So, video taken 1 hour ago outside the Portland ICE facility of the violent insurrectionists in question. If you're outlawing that, then you have lost your freedoms. If you're sending the troops into that, now it got a little more heated at night, but it's getting heated because you're sending in more and more overt militaristic people. Then it starts getting heated, and it goes back to who's fomenting these riots or these protests. So in a late night order, Judge Immergut, a Trump appointee, has blocked Trump from deploying the National Guard from any state or DC into Oregon. However, it seems to be happening. Governor Gavin Newsom says, okay, let's go back. J.B. Pritzker, the Illinois governor, says this evening President Trump is ordering 400 members of the Texas National Guard for deployments to Illinois, Oregon. There's talk about how they're taking people from red states, military people from red states, and putting them in blue states and other locations within the United States. No officials from the federal government called me directly to discuss or coordinate. That's into Illinois and Oregon. Gavin Newsom says this is breathtaking abuse of the law and power by the president of the United States. America is on the brink of martial law. Do not be silent. So you've got the governor of California, the fourth biggest economy in the world, saying we are on the brink of martial law. Right, that's what we're going to now start to look at, the kind of militaristic violence that we are seeing. I'm just going to go to some super chats first to give myself a breather. And thank you very much for these, by the way. Mitch Mazarol. As a preemptive measure, can you explain to the class what gaslighting is and how it's used as a pretext in our discussion today? Might be helpful for some. So gaslighting is where, I think it came from a play originally, where in the play, was it like the protagonist and his wife, or I think she was a protagonist. So the husband was saying that the gas was on or something in the flat, in the apartment or something like that, or the gas lights were on and they weren't on. And he was convincing her that they were on, even though they weren't. And it was to the point where she started doubting herself and then actually believing that they were on, something like that. And it's this process of like fooling people into believing the opposite of what is obviously reality. And let's get a formal definition, shall we, of gaslighting. Gaslighting definition. Okay, so gaslighting, the practice of psychologically manipulating someone into questioning their own sanity, memory, or powers of reasoning. So you then start questioning your own sense of reality. But I know the gaslights aren't on. And you're telling me that the gaslights are on, but I believe you, and so it must be my own senses that are not right. This happens an awful lot. Just that manipulation of people, like, and Trump does this very often with like just this sense of unreality. It goes back to like, you know, lying to people so completely that you're like, oh my god, well maybe the rest of the world has invested $17 trillion in the United States. I mean, I haven't seen that. Maybe tariffs are paid by China. Maybe China does pay the tariffs and we're actually taxing China, because I keep getting told by everyone that that's the case. That, I mean, I can understand that they can't be that, because like, I understand that you're putting import taxes and that, but if I'm being told that all the time, then that must be true. Okay, that's gaslighting. That's a really good request there. Thank you, Mitch, and thank you for your support. Kevin Force, thank you for your support. Really, really generous. Always. Johnny Nebregard, thank you for being here, Johnny. Captain Obvious, for the Spank JPGEO Liver Fund, yeah, or a car for Ukraine. Thank you, Captain Obvious. I'll do that. I'll do that last one. I really appreciate that, my friend. Thank you for your support for the channel. It keeps the lights on. Mark Biscuit, a fascist or a hyper-capitalist, an authoritarian nationalist, a far-right nationalist. Label Trump what you want. He is simply dangerous, destabilizing, destructive, and demented. Amen, brother. That is on point. It is unhealthy for the United States. I keep thinking, you know, even when Republicans were complaining back in the middle of Biden, were things really that bad? Like, really that bad? I just, yeah. Thank you, Mark, by the way. I really appreciate that. Right, let's go back to having a look at the evidence here then. Okay, we're going to go to Greg Gutfeld, and I just want it from Fox News, from the 5 on Fox News.
And the interesting thing, and I'll stop here, the right doesn't excuse their side of violence. When something bad happens, it's genetically coded in us. We are averse to risk. We are pro-law and order. We don't romanticize edginess, sometimes to a fault. You can call us dorky or nerds. But when somebody on our side does something, we're going to put them away for life. We're pro-death. But you guys cannot, you should have been able to look at that, Jessica, and say, God, that sucks. These people are awful. They've been doing it for years. It's terrible. Why is it that my side is always linked to hating law enforcement? Why is that? Could it be the narrative that just circles around these actions up to and before and including when it happens? That's how you should. Don't just say, well, it looks like ICE is being a little hard on them. Pepper spray. We only have pepper spray. What else can we do?
That was my internal monologue. And I guess that you just came out for wanting to rescind all the pardons for the J6ers who've gone out and even
J6 one day in 250 years. And we condemned it. We condemned
Talk
it.
to the President of the United States about, these are my people.
What about you're missing the point again. What about, I'm talking about a narrative. There was no narrative that caused that. What?
Greg Gutfeld is a pretty egregious human being. And here, like, he is basically saying, yeah, we're the ones of law and order. Yeah, we will put people away for life if they do this. It's like, hang on, didn't Trump come in and take actual insurrectionists and pardon 1,600 of them, including the ones who actually attacked a policeman? So don't tell us you're the side of law and order. Like, do you have such short memories as to what's going on? Absolutely outrageous there. Okay, let's go on to this. And again, the question is this what you would expect if you're looking at a government that is really up for democracy? Like, what is going on here? This is a Donald Trump video, some kind of, I presume, AI video that's been created again that he's putting out on his Truth Social platform. I have to, unfortunately, mute that because that is the Blue Oyster Cult with Don't Fear the Reaper, right? So this is playing to Don't Fear the Reaper, where you have the Grim Reaper, which is Donald Trump with the scythe. Now their time has come. Who's he reaping? Like, what? Why is he here? The power's gone. And then you got JD Vance there. Russ Vought is oh no, it's not Donald Trump. It's Russ Vought, Heritage Foundation guy. He wields the pen, it says here. He wields the pen, the funds, and the brain. Here comes the Reaper. Dems you babies. Here comes the Reaper. Obviously, they've reworked the song. Gonna tie your hands. Here comes the Reaper. Won't be able to fly. Here comes the Reaper. Crybaby, end your plan. So on and so forth. I mean, you get the point here. And then you've got Hakeem Jeffries. By the way, I just have to say, the other day, did not Donald Trump talk about the meeting he had with Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries in the White House about the shutting down of the? I must find this. If someone could find me the link and put it in a live chat, I'm fairly sure Trump didn't know who Hakeem Jeffries was. The speaker, minority speaker of the House of Representatives for the Democrats. He knew who Chuck Schumer was. Right, and he's been doing all these AI videos, or it's not him, obviously, it's people associated with him, it's his people. But he talked in an interview the other day and said, I had this meeting with Chuck Schumer, and then I think vaguely insulted Chuck Schumer, and then said, and this other guy who was quite nice. That other guy, he has actually said it was something like, oh, he was quite nice. It was Hakeem Jeffries. He literally doesn't appear to know who Hakeem Jeffries is, while simultaneously taking a mickey out of him with all these videos. But anyway, like, again, like, what bucket do you put that kind of performance in, where it appears to be Russell Vought and the Heritage Foundation going around grim reaping society? Anyway, the FBI is weighing an arrest and perp walk for Comey. So Jim Comey, the former FBI guy, political enemy, as it turns out, of Donald Trump. He's now, apparently, source told CBS News that the leadership has asked for, when Jim Comey is arrested, a large, beefy agents to conduct an arrest of Comey in full kit. In other words, this is performative. This is for the cameras. They're going to arrest Jim Comey, and they want really big, beefy guys who are fully dressed up in all their tactical gear, including Kevlar vests and exterior wear emblazoned with the FBI logo. And by the way, talking about the FBI logo, again, is this democracy or autocracy? Which bucket are you putting in? Get a load of this, right? Challenge coins being handed out by FBI Director Kash Patel. Seems someone put a lot of thought into this. Have you ever seen the Mitchell and Webb show where they did the scene of "Are we the baddies?" And you've got David Mitchell who's questioning. They're sitting in this bunker. And they've got their SS uniform on. It's like, we've got skull and crossbones on our uniform. He's like, we did it. Are we the baddies? Are we actually the bad guys? And that's the first thing I thought about this. This is Kash Patel's handing out these coins, challenge coins, presented by the director of the FBI. To just, are we living in a dystopian film future? You read that right. Director of the FBI, not a Special Forces unit, not a cartoon character, the FBI director. Just, again, what pot do you put all this in? Right, let's go on to the next one. Governor Newsom, Trump is illegally sending 300 California Guard members to Portland, flouting the law and treating judges as enemies. This comes after a Trump-appointed judge rejected the White House's justification for deploying federal troops. Jim Stewartson says this is civil war, one of the worst violations of the Constitution imaginable, the federal government forcing one state's militia to attack another state against the will of both states is a perverse inversion of the founders' written intent. This cannot stand. But of course, it apparently will stand. And again, you know, this goes back to Trump talking about how Portland is on fire. Okay, you won't be able to hear that because, again, he's standing under a bloody jet engine. Trump on the Portland ruling. I wasn't served well by the people who pick judges. I appointed the judge, and it goes like that. If he made that decision, Portland is burning to the ground. All you have to do is look to the TV and read your newspapers. What are you talking about? I read newspapers and I look at the TV, and Portland is not burning to the ground. There is no interpretation of reality that sees Portland burning to the ground. And if that's your justification for sending in troops, then where is the United States at? He says the judge ought to be ashamed of himself. this is just staggering, absolutely staggering. Right, now we're going to start getting onto just a whole bunch of videos that we are going to ask, what pot should this be put in? This is outside the Portland ICE facility. A man and a woman were standing talking to a pair of cops with shields when one of them draws his shepherd spray and unloads it into her face. She was still crying out in pain several minutes later and had to be taken away to get medical attention. Now, we have the right to protest, right, and the right to speak. Freedom of speech. She is standing there talking to the ICE person here.
Oh, shit.
Now, she's like goading them in a sense. Like, she's saying, you are effing stupid. So she's calling an ICE chap effing stupid, and then is justifying why she's saying that, at which point,
Who is talking to you? No. Hey, this is the line that they created. Oh, shit.
and then gets full on pepper sprayed in the face. Just, that's pretty nuts. Then we have, why are there snipers on the roof of a peaceful protest? Someone may correct me. I mean, are they the pepper bullet sniper rifles? I don't know. That looks like a genuine sniper rifle now. Not where we have seen people on the roof firing pepper bullets, but these are actual snipers. Wow. Check this out. As someone who, this is what happens when you empower the worst people in society, and the other guy says to the woman, "You're next." They're all on a fascist power trip. Okay, so here we have, again, someone who is standing there in a public place where they're allowed to stand, being told to move for no particular reason other than the ICE person wanted to stand there, or whoever this guy is.
Step back. I'm on a public road.
He's not doing anything. You're saying that. Whoa! He's not doing anything. He's not doing anything. No, he's not doing anything.
Over there.
No, he's not. I'm gonna stand right here. He's not doing. I'm gonna stand right here. I'm gonna stand right here. He's not doing anything.
You're going to stand while I tell you to stand, otherwise you're going to be next. Okay. Again, you know, it's difficult trying to keep peace, and, you know, if I'm going to be charitable to these authorities, but like somebody just standing there, getting treated like that, I don't know. I find that pretty controversial. Happening now, military-style crackdown is unfolding outside the Broadview ICE facility in Illinois. Snipers on the rooftops, as we heard, armored vehicles in the streets, protesters dragged away. This isn't immigration enforcement. This is an authoritarian theater. This is not the America they told us about, says someone. Now, so the question is, are you allowed to protest or not? Right? If you're not allowed to protest, then you don't have freedom in the country. And if you are sending the military in with guns, when you have peaceful protesters, and then moving them along and arresting them like this, I don't, you know, I find this problematic.
You said you identified. What are you going to tell your children? What are you going to tell your children? 10 years ago. He wasn't doing shit. Fuck, he wasn't doing shit. He wasn't doing shit. He wasn't doing goddamn thing. What the fuck? They weren't even doing anything.
Now, I've shown you stuff like this happening in Georgia, and we've all agreed that that is undemocratic and not good for freedom. And we have poured scorn on when the Tushki and the internal security services in Georgia have treated protesters like this. And yet this is happening to people who were not causing a problem. They were just standing there. You can see it on the camera. And as everyone else was saying, they weren't doing anything. and they are just attacked and apprehended by the security services. But it gets worse here. Like, well, I don't know if it's worse. Here's a different example of how ridiculous this all is and how dangerous this all is. These are Chicago police people who have been tear gassed by ICE.
They don't give a fuck about you either. Why you protecting them?
It's just absolutely incredible. And here we got more footage of them being tear gassed.
Y'all know that was fucked up. Come on, man.
Tomorrow it's you.
Come on, man. Y'all, you know that was fucked up. Y'all know that was fucked up. Y'all know that was fucked up.
So on and so forth. So, you know, just chaos as like, the police are sent to do a job, and then ICE are tear gassing them along with protesters. Absolutely incredible. Now, where is ICE getting these people, says this source? Did they just hire all the violent domestic terrorists Trump pardoned on day one? There is actually there's an investigation, I think, ongoing into, I was looking at someone sort of trying to do some investigation into who has been hired. There's a lot of people that have identified those from tattoos and whatnot, and there is definitely a prevalence of white supremacists who are involved in these.
You gotta strut like you mean it. Free your mind. It's not enough just to dream.
By the way, I believe this woman is a disabled peaceful protester, and there was a lot of controversy over this happening.
Free your mind. It's not enough just to dream it. Hey. Oh, come on.
She's disabled, leave her alone. So she's usually in a wheelchair, if I'm correct.
She's disabled now because she fucked around. So yeah.
As some supporters said, she's disabled now because she effed around. Well, I don't know that standing on a street is effing around, but you know, maybe your opinion is different to mine. Then ICE throw a flash grenade into a US citizen's car. So a woman pulled up next to ICE and said hello to them, and they told her to leave and then threw a flash grenade into her car. And you're thinking, is this where we're at?
Hey, you leave or put this grenade right in front of you.
I'm perfectly
I'm
legal.
sorry. I'm sorry. What's your call? What the fuck did you say? Oh, what the? Oh, what the?
So throwing flash grenades into people's cars. Just, you know, you might think that these people are, they're not big fans of us as ICE doing our job, but that's their right to protest that. Like, it goes back to this idea, like, if you believe in the right to protest, then you should allow people to protest you and say, you know, these are people that were like, freedom of speech. I can't believe the left is shutting down freedom of speech. Biden is attacking freedom of speech. And as soon as people say things they don't like, they throw flashbang grenades in their cars. It's like, well, that's not defending freedom of speech. So then we hear, and there have been some news about people who have now been shot by ICE. ICE stops a family at gunpoint, smashes a car window on top of a newborn baby. I was screaming that there was a baby, but they didn't care, cried the mother. I covered my baby with my body. I was so scared he was going to be hurt because glass was landing on him. She is heard on the video repeatedly asking to see the signed warrant. Agent flippantly replies, it's in the office. Under a 2020 Colorado law, ICE is not allowed to arrest people going to and from a courthouse, which is exactly where the family was coming from. So this is illegal. Maya England was still yet to be shown a warrant or even given a reason for her husband's arrest. Jose Aguilera is currently being detained in an ICE facility in Aurora, Colorado. Now, just look at how they're going about doing this. It's absolutely staggering. Guns out.
What is he being pulled over for? What is he being pulled over for? There's a child! There's a baby! Can you guys have a little bit mercy, dude?
So on and so forth. You get the idea. And then there's all sorts of stuff going on with people involving the press and in courthouses. People are being arrested as they go to immigration court. All the stuff I've shown you previously.
The fucking elevator. Get out the fucking elevator.
Who is that?
And it's just like thuggish behavior just all over the shop. That I just find pretty distasteful. And then just the breaking the law. So, breaking into people's cars without a warrant at a place where you're not allowed to arrest them, and then breaking into people's houses without a warrant. I mean, I'm fairly sure this is illegal, and yet this is what they're doing.
You don't have to show you an arrest.
To enter a home, you have to show an
So he's saying, I don't have to show you an arrest warrant. They're saying, well, to enter a home, you do have to show an arrest warrant.
Who's the wife?
Nobody's the wife, and why would you? Which one of y'all's the wife?
Do y'all want him to go to jail, or do y'all want to talk?
We want to see the warrant. We want to see the warrant. Where's the
wife?
Okay. No firme nada si no quiere. No tiene que hablar y ni decir nada. Y'all don't have to slam the door. This isn't your property. This isn't your property. Be slamming doors.
So then, they're breaking into a property and then stopping other people going into that property. And again, it's about due process. And then I wonder, is this due process? Actually, no, that's not to do with that. So police scanner captures the incident in Chicago. ICE agents shot a woman through the windshield in her arm and leg. They jumped out and started shooting at her, the victim said. According to the officer, she went to the police for help. I don't know if she bumped them and they took off, the officer said, but she ended up here. An ambulance was called and it's now being investigated as a crime scene. So all sorts of things going on in Chicago regarding this. And of course, like we've seen before, ICE has already done some pretty crazy stuff, like arresting 300 odd people and putting them in chains, South Koreans at the Hyundai plant. That was one that I reported on previously. And here you see all the people. They're now investigating in South Korea, like whether this was a case of infringing on their human rights, and that's caused an international diplomatic fracas itself. What else do we have? The government does not have the power to declare free speech zones, and a violent arrest of the rabbi should set off some alarms. What's this? Heard an officer say, let's do it. And then in the dark, they tackle Rabbi Ben to the ground. He's being loaded into a CCSO wagon now. Broadview police also here screaming at people. So again, the question is, who is fomenting this discontent? Is this coming from the protesters, or is this coming from the huge militaristic police and ICE presence? Whisking away a rabbi there and locking up. It seems that there are free speech zones or lack of free speech zones. And then when you put this out as a video, this is a US Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So this is ICE on their official channel saying, kind of tongue in cheek, refuse to walk, we'll give you a ride. And then showing they see me rolling, they hate it. And then a song, I can't play that for copyright reasons, but it's like, this is what they're glorifying. The fact that our government is treating people like this is disgusting, says Timothy Bellman. The fact that they're bragging about it makes it so much worse. And then just a couple more now. Then you hear stories, not stories. I mean, this is caught on camera, agent provocateurs. So these two were pretending to be Antifa and were trying to bull bait protesters by videotaping them and sneaking around so they were called out. And guess who they were? MAGA's finest, Joey Gibson, and Patriot Prayer Group, of the Patriot Prayer Group, and his girlfriend. And if you don't know who they are, look it up. So they've got these agent provocateurs, and here they were identified and balaclavas off and whatnot. And they were trying to be agent provocateurs. So caught fomenting violence, but wasn't the violence. Oh, sorry, you can't see that. Wasn't the violence, started by the protesters, but you've got agents provocateurs, people who are actually from the other side, trying to provoke, as agents, trying to provoke the protesters to doing like unsavory things. Just, as Malcolm Nance says, if you see agents provocateurs like this, videotape and call the police. This is not a joke. Call these people out, these MAGA people out. This is designed to start killings. And actually, on that note, there was talking about people who aren't who they claim to be. Is it this one? No. I've got another one. Here it is. So this is Jesse Waters, people pretending to be who they aren't. So last week, Jesse Waters on Fox News spoke to a man called Eric, who claimed he was formerly an Antifa member of Antifa. So I used to be Antifa, but this is me now, and I'm going to tell you what they're like. But 2 years ago, Waters interviewed Ramon Mundo Mendoza, a former Mexican mafia member. Some folks thought the men looked similar. This is a side-by-side comparison. The guy's the same guy, right? And you can hear him talk, and like for someone with the surname Mendoza, it sounds very much not like a Latino gentleman. Anyway, like this, there is so much subterfuge going on here in terms of like you've got Fox News seemingly platforming a guy who's supposed to be former Antifa and a guy who's supposed to be former drug cartel, and it's the same guy.
There's an error, especially when you're younger, that you're out here and you're doing something, and that's very appealing. It would have been
I'm trying to find the bit where the other guy's speaking. Anyway, I can't find a bit where he's. Yeah, here it is.
Allegedly stated that one of his motives or reasons was.
So the voice sounds slightly different. It's because the microphone's slightly different there. If you listen to his intonation and his diction, in my opinion, it's the same guy. And I just think, oh my goodness, like even Fox News are in on kind of agent provocateur, kind of, or it's not quite that, but it's provoking dissent against, say, certain groups of people because you're pretending this person is a former group of them and he's slagging them off, and it turns out he's probably neither of them, and it's the same guy doing both. It's just it's so frustrating. Now, the last thing I'll say before we go into the final bit here from Fox News, ICE brutally threw a 79-year-old American to the ground. He's now suing for $50 million. We're spending $40,000 to $80,000 to deport each immigrant. And now we're going to have countless lawsuits from these people out of control. Sadistic ICE agents unnecessarily brutalizing people. If you're a supporter of President Trump, you should come out against this brutality and stupidity. If not, you're complicit. This is a point that I had wanted to bring up previously because I think it's important. I think, and I've seen so many, like I've just picked like a random, 10, 12 videos out of about 8,000 I've seen in the last few days, few weeks, few months. And each of those appears to me an opportunity for someone to sue ICE, and with good grounds, right? I'm fairly sure this is going to cost the government an absolute arm and a leg. It's a bit like Doge getting rid of all those people and either rehiring them because they got rid of the wrong people, or there were no right people to get rid of because they were all civil servants who were doing a job, and then rehiring them and then that whole process costing, or then sacking people and then being taken to court for unfairly sacking them. It's like the whole thing is just a costly exercise that is going to cost the American taxpayer even more in the end. Okay, so the point of showing you all those videos, and there are plenty of them, is like, is this kind of militaristic society what you'd expect with an authoritarian rule or a democratic rule? And I know you are going to have protests like the BLM protests. You're going to have protests that get out of hand, but what is getting out of hand? And is someone standing there speaking to an ICE agent, like exercising their First Amendment rights? Is that worthy of tackling that person to the ground with 3 armed people and then zip tying him and sending them off to wherever? Like, is that where we're at? Is that what Americans want? Is this where you want society to be? Now, Caroline Levitt here from the White House said, as the White House press secretary said,
just last night, we saw an extremely troubling incident where conservative journalist Nick Sorter was captured on video being taken into custody by the Portland police after he was ambushed by Antifa and was defending himself from these assaults. But instead of arresting these violent mob members night after night after night who are ravaging this community, the police arrested a journalist who was there trying to document the chaos.
Nick Sauter is not a journalist. Nick Sauter is basically like, I don't know, libs of TikTok and all these like right-wing influencers cat turd. Nick Sauter is a bad dude in my opinion. And there's no way he's just doing flat journalism. He's almost like, anyway, he's quite provocative, but it's interesting that she like picks up on how the police arrested this guy for getting into a fracas, and like there's no talk about all these other, like the 79-year-old getting smacked to the ground and that disabled woman getting taken down. That just, no.
And everyone in this room should be extremely concerned about that. The Department of Justice spoke with that journalist this morning, and they will be launching a full investigation into his arrest. This incident is part of a troubling trend in Portland where left-wing mobs believe they get to decide who can visit and live in their city. It is not their city. It is the American people's city, and President Trump is going to restore that. I just spoke with the president about this, and he has directed his team here at the White House to begin reviewing aid that can potentially be cut.
And there's a key. So the reason I showed this video is because what she says at the end, which is we're now looking at cutting aid to Portland because the police there arrested someone that we like.
Portland. We will not fund states that allow anarchy. There will also be an additional surge of federal resources to Portland immediately, including enhanced CBP and ICE resources. Law and order will prevail, and President Trump will make sure of it. With that,
you are moving to this law and order society, as they call it. Like that's one of those pillars of how fascism works, and that's what she's talking about there. This is Chrissy Noem speaking.
We've got not just rioters and people that embrace violence to push back on what we're doing in this country. These are Antifa. We have terrorist organizations, and that's what I keep reminding people is we're not just dealing with criminals. We've got networks of cartel members and terrorists that are infiltrating these cities. And every day that we don't bring them to justice, they're recruiting new members, more people to their ranks. And that is why every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, DHS and our officers are working to get them off the street so that we can.
The hypocrisy is unreal. We will not allow domestic terrorists to overrun our cities, apart from 1,600 people that we did allow. And then when they were rightfully judged on that, they were incarcerated, and then we freed them. We will not allow, unless there are guys, then we'll free them. Right, okay, I've got it. Yeah. Again, what does that double standards look like? Does it look like something you'd expect on autocracy or democracy? Adam Kinzinger saying, where are the people who were so outraged? So then just another couple of nuggets to throw in here. So there was this app that was developed by someone to follow ICE around so you could know where ICE were as a kind of warning for those who might want to know where ICE are, right? And you know, if you map ICE a bit like on Waze, you can map a car crash so that people know there's a car crash on the road and you can go somewhere else. On this app, you can map the ICE are here so you could know so on and so forth. That app, Fox News didn't like it. No one on the right liked it because, of course, it would tell you where ICE were like hanging around making arrests. The government has now got Apple to pull that app, and Apple have backed down and pulled the app, and they've done what Trump wanted. Now, Adam Kinzinger rightfully, I think, says, where are the people who were so outraged that Biden asked Google to pull misinformation at COVID, and now Trump is fine with pulling and making Apple pull the ICE tracker app? And there is an interesting, I think, double standards at play there, and we could discuss that. What else? Apple drops the ICE tracking apps from its store after the Trump DOJ demanded it to happen. Steve Inskeep says, wait, now it's okay that the government demands that a tech company delete something? If memory serves, just a short time ago, this very action was described in the most heated terms, and not entirely without reason, as a totalitarian violation of the right to free speech. Interesting. And I think from a cultural point of view, what you're starting to see is a real return of, like, the Overton window's expanded, whereby it's now acceptable to do things that are truly horrible or it is emboldening people to do things that are horrible. This is one of these videos that you know, can it be connected to what's going on? I think it can. But you have someone who charges into a university lecture and just starts doing Heil Hitler.
What the fuck?
And he starts Heil Hitlering at the bottom. I'm just thinking, is this something that would have happened a couple of years ago? We have seen this resurgence of the far right. We've seen a resurgence of acceptability of white supremacy, where Nick Fuentes, your white supremacist, has now got his own channel. He's platformed, he's interviewed by loads of people. He's been given this acceptance, and yet he is a white supremacist. And you've got this acceptability where people just feel, hey, I'm going to just for a laugh go in and Heil Hitler in the middle of a lecture. Anyway, what was great about this video is pretty much most of the hall then ran out and chased this guy down, and they actually found him and they gave him a bit of a kicking. And I kind of, you know, I don't know, you know, I don't know. Do you have that coming? Is that free speech? Should he be allowed to completely disrupt a lecture by Zeke Heiling? I don't know that is acceptable. Anyway, my broader point is that you're starting to see activity like that, and I just want to go to this example of more violence has taken place, and the kind of dangers of, say, Charlie Kirk, Andrew Tate, and these kind of people that exist or did exist in Charlie Kirk's case, in these online spaces that end up turning young men into, I think, problematic individuals. So Charlie Kirk fan stalked these two teenage girls for months. He did live streams where he harassed them. This was on the news recently. This is pretty horrific. He did live streams where he harassed them, murdered them, and after one of them said something critical about Charlie Kirk. This should be headline news. It's a horrific tragedy, yet very little was spoken about it. Some of you would have heard about this. New York Post here reporting New Jersey teen girls killed in a quiet suburb by an alleged stalker who ran them down in a Jeep. She made complaints to the police previously, but nothing was done. Classic kind of I'm being stalked, yeah, whatever type thing. Nothing was done, and then he ran them down after they were rude about Charlie Kirk. And just on the Charlie Kirk front, I think, because to link it back to authoritarianism, this is Rolling Stone reporting, quote, the horrific murder of Charlie Kirk gave someone like Mr. Trump, with all his vindictive pettiness and disregard for the law, the very opening he needed to kick a campaign of legal retribution into high gear, says Bradley Moss, a longtime national security lawyer whose firm represents people who've been targeted by the second Trump administration. Quote, there arguably is no comparable point in the history of this country, not even when Americans fought each other during the Civil War, when the very constitutional framework has been so close to succumbing to the authoritarian whims of a single individual. So it turns out within 24 hours of the Kirk shooting, top Trump officials and administration lawyers were drafting legal memos, writing blueprints for possible executive actions, prioritizing which liberal organizations and strongholds of the left needed targeting. Charlie Kirk got killed, and they're straight away like, how can we use this to attack the left, the opposition, the political opposition, so that we can target these with lawfare, with law and order, with outright militarization? They need to suffer inside Trump's war on dissent. After Charlie Kirk's murder, Trump expanded his war on free speech, the left, and ordinary Americans. It's only going to get worse. So I thought that was worth bringing that in, kind of linking the Charlie Kirk thing with the militarization through ICE. And then we've got Adam Mockler here. This is a terrifying end of the radicalization pipeline. A boy goes from posting about baseball to consuming Andrew Tate and Charlie Kirk. Years later, he stalks and kills two teenage girls, then goes on to do a live stream to talk about his right-wing heroes. And we do need to worry an awful lot about online spaces, about regulation of online spaces. At the moment, Twitter has become this like cesspit again, not again, like more so than ever, this cesspit of just radicalization where people are sent to these extremes. And I think the US at the moment is a place where the extremes are being allowed to flourish. And I think that's really, really dangerous. And there doesn't seem to be any checks on, you know, the people in government, who's employed. I mean, take this, for example. Trump's nominee to run the Bureau of Labor Statistics after getting rid of McEnteffer because he didn't like the labor statistics rather than, you know, anything to do with her being bad at her job, is like, I'm going to shoot the messenger, so I'm going to sack you. Trump's nominee to run the Bureau of Labor Statistics ran an anonymous Twitter account filled with sexually degrading attacks on Kamala Harris, anti-gay slurs, and far-right conspiracy theories. And that's the guy to run the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So anyway, like, all in all, like, I think just the whole landscape at the moment is really, really charged. And I think it's a very dangerous place at the moment, the United States. And unfortunately, everything I see goes into the bucket of autocracy, of corruption. And, you know, I could talk to you for a couple of hours on just all the grifting corruption that's taking place in the American government, and how, just like Viktor Orban and his family, Trump and his extended family are grifting on account of Trump's position of power. You know, I could talk about all of those different elements of the 10 pillars of fascism, or go into the other list of 10. And it's just incredibly scary. Like, where is this headed? And I'm thinking that Gavin Newsom has it right, that this is code red. This is a 5-alarm fire. You know, the top level of alarms are now going. There is a fire in the forest of democracy in the United States, and that bad boy is burning down. You know, I often talk about, I've talked about this to do with other contexts, but this is the kind of theory of exponentiality, whereby, I mean, mathematically, this is a thing, but I think you can apply it to the United States at the moment. You've got a pond, and in 30 days, it gets filled up with pond lilies, right? And the entirety of the pond is covered in these lilies, and that then stops, you know, light getting to water, and that's a problem. We do not want the pond covered entirely in lilies. On the first day, there's 1 lily. You know, on the second day, there's 2 lilies. On the third day, there's 4 lilies. At what point do you look at the pond and go, we need to do something about that because it keeps doubling? So when you look at the pond and it's only half full of lilies, you're inclined to think, hey, it's all right. We've got half the pond to go. But these things move exponentially. And it takes just 1 day for that pond to go from half full to completely full. So what point are we? Like, are we looking at the US at the moment and going, that's all right? You know, there's still half a pond without lilies on. You know, if you wait until it's too late, you run out of time. And that is just not cool. I do worry. I think the United States is making every decision it can at the moment to endanger the political processes and endanger free and fair elections from taking place. The polls are looking really bad for Trump at the moment in terms of, you know, looking at the form of the Democrats in all the special elections. Yes, the Democrats are not polling well. And if you compare Democrats to Republicans, you think, oh, the Democrats are polling the worst they ever have done. It's terrible. The Democrats are useless. But actually, they're overperforming when it comes to actual elections. And that's really the better metric, is where they compare if you pit one against the other in this kind of dichotomy. You can only choose one or the other. So you might say that the Democrats are shite and their leadership's rubbish and whatever, but actually in all the elections that are taking place at the moment, they're stomping all over the Republicans. And there's you know, it's certain that the Republican leadership will know this outside of Trump. I think he just gets fed crazy numbers and he believes them. He thinks his polls are amazing, but Trump is underwater on pretty much everything. Right. And they know that they're going to lose the House of Representatives. Like Rob Reiner said at the top of the video, they're going to lose the House of Representatives in the midterms, November midterms. So they're not going to go down the route of trying to convince people on policy and on, you know, using democratic messaging. They realize that that's not going to happen because all the things they want to do are deeply unpopular. They're going to absolutely erode Medicare, Medicaid, welfare, which a lot of the people, the poor people in their red states, depend on, and they're the people that vote for them in these rural red states and so on and so forth. They're going to hang them out to dry. So we're not going to win on policy. So what are our other options for staying in power? And then for Trump, it is all about staying in power. He's got those Trump 2028 caps and T-shirts. He is going to stay in power. And so for him, it's just about rigging the elections, or even maybe having an option where elections don't take place, where you've got martial law. He keeps calling national emergencies. That's his way of dealing out these executive orders, these EOs that he does 10 a penny. EO, EO, EO. And he doesn't have to use Congress. Congress is just looking on, going, what are we doing? And then the Epstein files comes up, and there's Thomas Massey's discharge petition. Needs one more vote. So what happens? They need one more vote, and they get Grijalda from Arizona District 7 in a special election, romps through with over 70% of the vote. Talking about a special democratic election. Okay, her father was popular, and he died, and she's now taken over the mantle. She was voted in with a massive, they doubled the Democratic majority there, right? And then what happened is Mike Johnson refused to sign her in, refused to swear her in, because that vote will mean that Epstein files have to be published, because the discharge petition would go through the House of Representatives. So instead of that happening, instead of swearing her in, as he should do as the Speaker of the House of Representatives, he doesn't swear her in and then waits until there's a government shutdown and then sends Congress into recess, and now she can't get sworn in. They have manipulated a situation whereby the Epstein files will not be published. And again, is that what you'd expect in transparent democracy, or is that what you'd expect in an autocracy where the leader is dictatorial and all his minions around him are putting things in place to perpetuate that power and that dictatorial power? It's absolutely insane. Now, you can say the Dems are weak, or Biden and Dems were weak. And you can say they are weak now because they don't have any levers of power. And then it comes down to, and I'll leave you with this, because I know it's been a long one. I said it's going to be a long one. I'll leave you with this. There's some discussion about the shutdown, because the shutdown the government is being shut down over whether there should be continued lower insurance premiums to pay for Medicaid and Medicare. And if the Republicans get their way, then the premiums will go up double or triple. And actually, this will overwhelmingly affect voters in red states. And so you've got these two options here, which is one, you either shut down the government because you're fighting for those people to get cheaper premiums so they don't get screwed over. That's what the Democrats have done. And you can think they're being quite hardcore to shut down the government. But actually what they're doing is they're alleviating the problems. If they succeed, if the Democrats succeed, they will get no props really in the long term for alleviating the problem that is being put upon the electorate by the Republicans. In other words, they will successfully stop those voters getting double or triple insurance premiums. The Democrats are fighting rightly in one sense, rightly because they're concerned about the electorate. But there are certain other Democrats and analysts. I was listening to Sarah Longwell and JVL on the Bulwark talk about this, saying they shouldn't be shutting down the government. They should be saying, yeah, okay, you want that. Your voters in red states and blue states as well are going to get insurance premiums that are 2 and 3 times worse than they are right now, like that. And rather than fighting to mitigate the disaster that you're putting on the electorate needs to understand that you are doing this. We're not going to walk around and clean up your mess, because that's what the Democrats are seemingly doing. They're trying to clean up the mess of the Republicans. You want to make this worse for low and middle income Americans. You want to make it worse. We're going to try and make it better for them. Stop trying to clear up the mess of the Republicans, let them own it, and then they will get punished for putting that upon the electorate. So there are these two different pathways that the Democrats could take, and some are saying, "Oh, well done for being strong and keeping your ideals and shutting the government down and not backing up, not bending the knee to the Republican demands." But then there's a bunch of other people saying, "No, you should let the government stay open and let the Republicans get what they want, and then the electorate will realize what they've actually voted for. You voted for these guys, and they fecked you over. They've done you." You voted for this. As a majority of the people who will be hit by the Medicaid increases in premiums are poor Republican voters. Anyway, there you go. It's all going nuts, and I'm looking at this from an outsider, just thinking this just does look like autocracy. Anyway, thank you from Michael Viewchart for the ATP Geopolitics membership support. Really appreciate that. Thank you all the way from the United States of Canada. And Harry O, it's like going back in time to the night of the long knives of the 1930s. Yeah, I think you got the Reichstag fire or similar. These different incidences where they were just these moments where, like, you could see it was an inflection point, but also as an excuse for in that case, the Nazis to then go and do X, Y, and Z and take even more power. So what are these flashpoints that are taking place here? Like, is Portland and California and Chicago and Illinois, are these Chicago, Illinois, are these the Reichstag fires that the Republicans or that Trump is going to use to wrest more power from the American people and from Congress and from the judiciary? When you've got houses burning of liberal judges, when you've got the donors, the organizers, the politicians being harangued, harassed, and targeted by the DOJ and by the Trump administration, you have got an oppression of the political opposition. You've got an oppression of the political activists, politicians, and funders. This is all a move to maintain power. This is all a move to get the US to a greater degree of autocracy, and it's insanely worrying. Anyway, that's all I've got for you. It's a splurge of data and stuff. I hope it all made sense, and that there is a coherent message I'm trying to say here. I think it truly is a scary place at the moment, says Daniel, who's not American. Thanks, JP. USA is a scary place at the moment. Been many times and work for an American company. No way I'd visit until Trump's gone. I just think that is it a truly much better place now than it was a year ago? I find it hard to say. So, you can be robust with immigration and with crime. You can do that through legislation and through policy. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you would get an agreement that in this febrile atmosphere where the Democrats understand that people's opinions on immigration are going in a certain direction. You had the strictest bipartisan agreement done by Senator Langford that has ever been done, and Trump ripped it up and said no, because then we won't have anything to campaign on. So I think you've got better ways of doing this than sending in the military and then changing the rules like that NPSM 7 ruling. Honestly, stuff like that's what you need to worry about, but what most people won't be aware of. That's where the United States is going. Be wary. Like I keep saying to you, this is the last thing I'll say. Everything that Trump and his administration do and says and puts into place, the policy, the executive orders, the activities, the pushing military from here to there, ask yourself, does it go in the democracy or the autocracy bucket? Does it go in the corruption or the anti-corruption bucket? Does it go in the obfuscation, or does it go in the transparency bucket? Now, which bucket? Is it the good bucket or the bad bucket? Ask yourself that of everything that takes place, and ask that same with your country as well. Like the Labour government have just tightened the rules on protesting in the UK, and I need to look at the details of that, but I'm very worried that is going to make protesting even more difficult in the UK as well. So we need to be careful about growing autocracy, no matter where it comes from. That is the end of my soapbox lesson. Thank you for all of your support. I really do appreciate it. And let's hope that if someone sees a Nazi bucket, that we kick the bucket. Right. Okay. Take care. Appreciate you. And keep fighting a good fight for democracy, transparency, and anti-corruption. All the best.